Hello everybody, welcome to Us Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Like the video. I have recorded 4 times. Please like the video. I have gone through so many struggles to get this video out. You're getting game 1 and game 2 together because game 1's recording fucked up audio. Didn't work. Anyways, we're gonna be covering games 1 and 2 as I mentioned, and this show is now available on Spotify. We talked about it in the last video if you guys would be up for that, and it was an overwhelming yes. So if you are interested in listening to this as an audio-only experience, head over to Spotify. Link will be the top one in the description and the pinned comment. We are going to be expanding to other audio platforms soon, but currently Spotify was all we could do on short notice. But yeah, let's get into covering these games. The Wolves could not have asked for a better start to their first quarter, with the score at the 5-minute mark being 18-4 in their favor. On offense, Ant made it clear from the very beginning that we were in for a memorable performance, hitting some wild threes early, including staring down KCP and shooting it in his grill, and pulling up off of a Conley screen over Jamal Murray. And on defense, they would essentially shut down Jokic in this quarter. He still managed to score 9 points because he is Nikola Jokic, but he shot 2 for 7, which is uncharacteristically inefficient. Minnesota was having either REID or Karl Anthony Towns guard Nikola Jokic on the initial matchup. Neither of those guys are crazy strong defenders in terms of their ability, but they are strong defenders in terms of literally being strong dudes, so they could hold their own on the Jokic matchup initially, and then Rudy Gobert was quote-unquote guarding Aaron Gordon in the corner, aka leaving him wide open, which meant that Rudy could rotate to help on any move that Nikola Jokic made. Yikes. But I highlighted the 5-minute mark because there was a huge run for Denver now to be had, as they would go on a 20-3 run. This run was not spearheaded by Nikola Jokic nor Jamal Murray, but instead it was Reggie Jackson and Michael Porter Jr. Reggie got a steal on Nickeil Alexander-Walker and threw a lob to MPJ. He also hit an extremely gutsy pull-up 3 over Nickeil. And MPJ would finish with 9 in the quarter, hitting some gorgeous shots. The only 3 points Minnesota would score would at least come with some bonus style points, as Ant had an MJ-esque and 1, taking the bump and hanging in air long enough to absorb the contact and finish with a soft touch. Denver miraculously managed to go into quarter 2 up 2 despite the dreadful start, but if Minnesota's defense was going to be this good the whole way through, Denver was in for a battle for the next 3 quarters. And quarter 2 was just that. It was a tough defensive affair, both teams shooting below 40% from the field, and they scored 17 and 19 points between them. Even the shots that did go in were very difficult. These are 2 great defensive teams, and defense was the deciding factor of this game, and it might very well be the deciding factor of this series. Kyle Anderson had an insanely tough finish over MPJ, where Michael blocked the dunk, but Kyle muscled through it so that it would go in. Aaron Gordon ripped Cat as they were getting chipper with each other, resulting in a Christian Brown dunk on the other end. Jokic went 3 for 7 in this quarter and would get 2 turnovers, the only shots he made being when he had just Rudy Gobert to worry about one-on-one. Which, it obviously feels crazy to say that Rudy Gobert, one of the greatest defenders of all time, is like the ideal situation for Nikola Jokic, but Gobert is far less of a problem for Jokic on his back than he is lurking around the rim. Jamal Murray was also having a very rough time, being shut out with 0 points, going 0 for 5. Denver managed to enter the half up 4 because despite the fact that their star players were shooting just 5 for 19 from the field, Minnesota wasn't exactly having the easiest time on offense either. The second half was quite different from the first, as both of these teams found their stride on the offensive end. Denver and Minnesota combined for 84 points in the first half. They would combine for 121 in the second. Mike Conley and Karl Anthony Towns were both hot this quarter, both scoring 11 points and both not missing a shot. The duo of Jokic and Murray was much better in this quarter. Jokic ran the pick and roll as the handler with Aaron Gordon and threw him a lob. Just your classic center ball handling handling in the pick and roll. Murray would beat the shot clock with a fadeaway three that was all net, and he hit the second MJ-esque layup of the game with a reverse not looking at the rim with Rudy Gobert all over him. Ant had a quiet scoring quarter, but he got a filthy block that ended in a filthy dunk on the break from Karl Anthony Towns plus the foul. One of Ant's few buckets came on a post move on the baseline against Reggie Jackson. From that point, he would stare Reggie down, and that was called for taunting. I don't think I have to worry about being controversial or divisive here when I say this. That's fucking bullshit. We almost all agree that this is bullshit and shouldn't be what the game is officiated like. Even if you are a Nuggets fan, you probably feel that way. Nikola Jokic scored 1 point off of this, getting the bonus free throw from the technical. You can't do that. Every fucking point matters. You can't have a point determined by a dude stared at another dude and it was a little mean. What the hell is that? Trash talk and that kind of behavior, it's one of the more enjoyable aspects of the sport. I think in many ways, it's one of the reasons that sport exists. It's so that instead of punching each other, we're just playing basketball and making mean mugs at each other. Literally, James Naismith made basketball because he was trying to get the boys to stop fighting. Why would you police this? It's just lame. No one's happy about it. It makes the NBA a worse product. It makes the games more bullshit, which you already have to deal with enough with people complaining about the officiating. Just drop it. Like, the rule should exist in the case of like someone who is harassing another guy, but that rarely happens. Otherwise, we like the taunting. We want it to happen. Leave it alone. Anyways, that long thing aside, Denver was entering the quarter up 73-71. Aaron Gordon would get an and one off of a really great pass from Michael Porter Jr., a series of words that I have been finding myself saying more and more lately, by the way. Jamal would hit a filthy step-back three plus the foul over Karl Anthony Towns, which unfortunately for Cat was his 5th of the game, so he spent a lot of this quarter riding the pine. A few minutes into this quarter, after a relatively quiet third, Anthony Edwards would show out. He scored 12 points on 80% shooting in this quarter, including a driving layup after dancing around a Gobert screen to lose Christian Brown, and after the Nuggets played 18 seconds of good defense, he got Aaron Gordon with a cross for just a second, and that was all the time that he needed to get to his spot and hit the shot. This despite the good recovery from Gordon. Mike Conley hit a corner no-dip three-pointer to beat the shot clock off of a great skip pass from REID. I will always highlight a no-dip three. That is a Rusty Buckets guarantee. They're so fucking sick. It seemed like this matchup was so even that we might actually get an overtime, but at the halfway point of the quarter, REID put on the backpack. He single-handedly went on a 10-0 run, hitting a pair of threes, including a shot clock-beating bank-in three. He had a nasty putback dunk, and he would finish through contact for an and one. I thought the game was over with a minute to go after a midi from Anthony Edwards that really felt like the dagger, but Jokic, who was missing threes all game, would receive a down screen from Jamal to get a three at the top of the key, and it was all net. And he would quickly, off of the inbounds, do a handoff to Michael Porter Jr., who would hit a difficult three on the right wing. Somehow, it was just a 5-point game with 35 seconds to go, which for this extremely clutch Denver Nuggets team is pretty doable. Not easy, but doable. However, they would sell it immediately, as no one would stop Anthony Edwards driving coast to coast. I mean, literally nobody got between him and the basket in a fucking playoff game. So Minnesota would win 106-99, stealing home court in Denver, which is extremely hard to do. My key notes for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I can't believe the game I just watched. This is one of the best games I ever watched. The reason why my original recording was 37 minutes is I could not stop ranting and raving about how fucking sick this game was. And mind you, the Denver Nuggets are one of my favorite teams in the entire league. I loved watching this team go on a run last year. I personally feel a little attached to them, just given that I had the take forever ago, as soon as Aaron Gordon was traded to this team, that it was about to be championship time. but then Jamal Murray tore his ACL, and we had to wait 2 years to actually see it come to fruition. I always feel good when I get something like that right, and I like Denver a lot. I like the system around him, around Nikola Jokic and the play finishers and all that. I think it's an excellent structure. Seeing something that to me was so remarkably unstoppable get stopped was insane and compelling and exhilarating. I was talking with my dad literally earlier that day about why the Phoenix Suns didn't work out, because yes, even in my free time, I talk shit about the Phoenix Suns, but I was just talking about like, hey, their offensive players do not get the defense in rotation. They're constantly isolating. It's not drawing the attention of the defense. In the modern NBA, top scorers in the league can't be stopped one-on-one, so you need to bring two to the ball, and then that star player needs to be able to make the right pass, and the Suns didn't really have that. Nikola Jokic is the prime example of this. Nikola Jokic is too hard to stop one-on-one in the post, so you have to bring two defenders if you're going to stop him. It's a paradox because you fucking can't bring two defenders to him because he's always going to make the right pass and always make the right read, and he's got a litany of excellent play finishers around him. It was so unstoppable, they dominated all of the playoffs last year because of it. But this defensive team, this Minnesota team, may be one of the best defensive teams of all time. It's like I'm watching Joe Dumars, Andre Karolinko, and like Ben Wallace all on the same team. Holy shit, the defense of this squad, I think they're an all-timer. Now, when I say Jokic was shut down in this game, obviously he wasn't terrible. He still had 32 points because I don't think you can stop him. If he wants 30, he's getting 30, and the Nuggets very much needed him to do that. But he did it on very poor efficiency, which, as I mentioned earlier, is extremely uncharacteristic. He was forced into taking 9 3-pointers, which is the most he's taken this entire season. He missed 14 shots in total, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's the most shots he's missed this entire season. I didn't look that part up, but I bet you it is. And he had 7 turnovers. Again, probably pretty high up there. Jokic doesn't really survive as a volume 3-point shooter. Last year in the playoffs, he was good enough at the shot that you had to respect him, and I think he's still good enough at the shot that you have to respect him. However, there's a difference between you have to respect me and ideally I should be getting 9 3-pointers a game. Huge difference between that, and Jokic is not in that tier. He's not one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA by any stretch. Low volume, high efficiency guy. 9 attempts though, as soon as he has the high volume, only hits 2 of them. He did miss a bunch of touch shots around the rim that I think he's capable of making, and that's going to make life harder for Minnesota because this is probably a combination of their defensive scheme and his offensive touch just being a little bit off, because Jokic sometimes, every once in a while, has these games where his touch is off, and like touch is the defining factor of his scoring game. He's like statistically the best floater range player who's ever played basketball. So by having a help defender on that, you're somewhat taking it away. He can still make it, but it was a lot harder to make it. And I don't think it's going to be as bad from here on. Jokic is just too good of a player for that to happen, but it's going to be enough that I'm genuinely concerned about Denver, especially considering Jamal Murray's injury. But before I get more into that, we're talking about Minnesota. Rudy Gobert as the roamer is so remarkably effective, and I think we need to have a discussion about his trade because a lot of people were calling it the worst trade in NBA history. I do think I was a little bit critical of it after their last season where they didn't end so well, but I also, if I'm remembering correctly, call me out if I'm not, I said that this team needed more time to cook. This was just the first year and they could bring it around. Now, I never thought they'd be as good as they are now, at any point, not just this season, ever. But I did think that it wouldn't be the worst trade in NBA history. But this might actually be one of the better ones, as it turns out. Like, yeah, Rudy Gobert's not worth all those draft picks, especially considering all the money that he makes. However, having him on this specific roster and what that does for everything else you have going on, that was absolutely fucking worth everything that Minnesota gave up, because I'm starting to think this team's a real contender. I put them in the B tier of contender, so I consider them in that class, but I always say there's A's and B tier contenders. This year my A tiers were the Celtics and the Nuggets, and like OKC and Dallas were below that. I thought about moving Dallas into the A, but I think they're too fringe for that reason. Minnesota might be the team that is moving up to the A tier for me, and they're a fucking matchup nightmare for Denver. Let's talk about the offense a little bit. A little bit more rough for Minnesota. It was a big carry job from Anthony Edwards, which does have me a little bit concerned about how the rest of this series goes. There was a good Karl Anthony Towns stretch in there, mostly in the third quarter, and a very good Naz Reid stretch in the fourth quarter. That was enough to get them by on Anthony Edwards, otherwise having to do most of the scoring. That does concern me though, just because maybe they changed the defensive scheme and Ant doesn't quite go off the way that he did here. I think Denver did a decent enough job against Anthony Edwards. He was just hitting some tough ass shots because he plays like Michael Jordan, and sometimes Michael Jordan is just gonna fucking score on you. Obviously he's not as good yet. Did I just say yet? Don't tell anybody I said yet, please. That's between you and me. But yeah, Anthony Edwards, awesome. Denver is gonna have to change how they cover him. I think they should throw Aaron Gordon at him, just get a bigger body. I think it's worth it. It's a little bit awkward just because you have to worry about Cat and Gobert or Naz and Gobert on the offensive end. I think Michael Porter Jr. could probably do a decent enough job on Towns though, and that could be worth having Gordon on the initial Edwards matchup. Obviously Gordon would be better with that Cat matchup, but I think you prioritize the Edwards thing. But anyways, I keep talking about the Nuggets solutions here. I'm supposed to talk about the Timberwolves. Shout out to Naz Reid. Dude was awesome in the fourth quarter, and what he's able to do defensively. Again, I don't think Naz is like some great defender, but he is a big body. He's not stupid. He tries hard, and he's strong. And that's what they need. This is probably the new meta for beating Denver. The problem is it's just really hard to replicate because the offensive negatives that come out of three centers being very prominent in your rotation doesn't exist with Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns. Not a lot of teams can get two big men that are legitimate, very good three-point shooters. Naz sometimes borders on just okay. Cat's arguably the best shooting center who's ever played the game. I think he is. So for that reason, he plays power forward now, obviously. But for that reason, this is a matchup nightmare for Denver. And it's crazy. I thought that the center thing was dumb. I was like, you should trade Naz Reid. Naz Reid should be able to be a starter because he's too good to come off of the bench. And you could round out your roster in a way that isn't in a position that you already have two all-star tier players. However, as it turns out, the Timberwolves were operating with a million IQ because this is the exact scheme necessary to bother an otherwise unbotherable Denver offense. I think they could do it, for real. I really, really do. All right, let's talk about the Denver Nuggets. Yikes, this was a rough one. Minnesota made them play their game, and I really can't say that any other team has ever done that, especially on their home floor. Even when teams beat Denver in the playoffs last year, they were close games. I mean, this was close too, but it was like, it wasn't that convincing. It was almost always by a very narrow margin, and this was a pretty convincing win for Minnesota. Obviously, the deficit wasn't that significant, but it really felt like they were going to win this game the whole way through, even as they were trailing entering the fourth quarter. It just felt like they were playing too good not to. Nikola Jokic and Jamal did everything they could. Jamal Murray had a much better second half. I don't know if I mentioned that in the earlier. And Jokic had a much better second half. If we're going to talk about some positives for Denver, that's definitely it. I would also say Michael Porter Jr. might be a star player. Now, he didn't have anything in the fourth quarter, but he had 20 points on the game in general. This team being a low volume three-point shooting team, and in this series, them now kind of getting screwed in the paint, which is where they normally like to dominate, having him really shoot the piss out of the ball would make a big difference. Shooting a lot of attempts. I think Michael maybe should get up like 10 threes a game in this series if they're going to continue to have the paint on lockdown like this. Peyton Watson. Oh boy, we gotta talk about the bench, and it starts with Peyton Watson. Wide open three in the corner. Obviously, Rudy is treating this the same way he treats Aaron, but I at least have more faith in Peyton to actually hit this shot than I do Aaron, but he airballed it badly. He airballed it very badly, got pulled. I thought he would be ready for the postseason. I thought he could be a strong defender, and I thought his three ball would hold up well enough. He shot like 40% from three in the last, I don't know how many games it was, but it was like 20, 30 something. I don't really know what to do with their bench, because if he's not it, it's not Justin Holiday. Justin Holiday is probably one of the worst players currently in an NBA playoff rotation. Reggie Jackson, shocked he's as good as he is, but it's probably not him. Christian Braun is a strong defender, but his offensive game leaves a lot to be desired. He can be a really strong finisher sometimes, but his three ball is not, you know, the defense is happy to let Christian Braun shoot for sure. The biggest problem in this game for this team is Aaron Gordon, because you can't not play him on defense. You need that role, and he's a significant part of their offense. He's the fourth option, and the fourth option is not top priority, obviously. It's the fourth priority, but having that offense available is very useful, and they currently don't. And you can't sub him out. You can't, there's not really a shooter you can put in the game. You know, are you banking on Justin Holiday? He's the only guy who you can call a quote-unquote shooter on this team, and I don't want to fucking play Justin Holiday. I don't know about you. I don't think Michael Malone wants to do that. I almost called him Budenholzer. I do think that they could have him do some more action off of the ball, really just moving, period, because I don't think you can just concede him standing in the corner. Like, if you're just going to accept that Aaron is standing in the corner for the entire offensive possession and he's not going to shoot the ball, then you are essentially waving a white flag. You have to do something to get him moving that ideally can get Rudy Gobert into the action to some level of degree. Maybe you run pick and rolls with Aaron Gordon. Maybe you have him roll into the basket, but then again, Rudy Gobert can just fucking wait at the basket even still, so I'm not even sure if that would work. In terms of the action that I would recommend, I think they need to do more pick and rolls. The post up with Jokic and then everybody cut around and screen for each other for threes and stuff, that is what won them a championship. I understand that, but when the game got close, they would always go to that pick and roll duo between Jamal and Jokic. And effectively, the post up for Jokic is extremely good. It always has been. It's extremely dominant. His points per possession, the points that he generates, whether it's off of his own scoring or his teammates, it's insanely good, but it wasn't good in this game. He wasn't hitting his touch shots, and there were no passing opportunities available to him. He had 7 turnovers. They were clogging all of the lanes. It was crazy. But if you're running pick and roll, you can at the very least get the defense moving. Ideally, there's some way to pull Rudy Gobert from the rim in that action. Gotta see if there's some way you can switch them. It's difficult though, because there's not a lot of incentive for him just to not be like, I'll stay right here at this fucking basket. Maybe if like Cat gets lost on the screen, Jokic can get to his floater area, and at that point it's just the contest from Rudy and it's not quite on time. The other thing I would recommend, the little post hook pass thing that Nikola Jokic does, I think he has to do that a lot. If he could go for the shot and time it to where Rudy Gobert jumps, but then he just makes it an alley-oop instead, and Aaron Gordon, of course, can time that backdoor cut, then that works great. Normally, the way that they have counteracted the leaving Aaron Gordon open thing is the backdoor cut. You know, you let him get a bunch of momentum right into the basket, and Jokic throws the pass right on time. It's hard to guard, but Rudy Gobert is in between Gordon and the basket this whole time. He's only leaving that situation to contest Nikola Jokic. Otherwise, if he's not having to contest Jokic and they try to do that, he broke it up. I think he broke it up like 2 different times in this game. So that's a move I would go to. I would try to run more pick and roll, but in general, I think Denver has to win this series on the defensive end, which I think is crazy to say. They're definitely an offense first team, but an underrated defense for sure, a very good one. They wouldn't have won a championship if they weren't, but they're gonna have to have better coverage on Anthony Edwards. They're gonna have to bank on the fact that in spite of the fact that that team is defending them very, very well, they're going to still have a bad offensive series for what they are expecting. So you're gonna have to beat them on defense. Your offense is going to have to be enough. Your offense is going to have to be, look, us against a great defense and them against a great defense, we score more points. And I still think that's true. I think that's ultimately why Denver would win this series. I think they will win it in 7 in Denver. I also feel like though they did win game 1 in Denver, the likelihood of doing it again, that's lightning striking twice in my opinion. Maybe it does happen, but if I am Minnesota, I am making making sure that series does not go 7 and they get it done in 6 if they're going to. I don't think the Timberwolves are like that clearly the second best team in the West, but they are that clearly that bad of a matchup for this team. Obviously, I recorded this before Game 2. I didn't want Game 2's result to affect my commentary of Game 1, so I'm gonna go watch that now, and I'm very, very excited. I'll be back. So at the start of the game, they announced that Rudy Gobert was not going to be playing in this one, so my immediate reaction was, oh, so this series is going to be tied 1-1 going back into Minnesota. They're just going to have no issue on offense like they did in Game 1 because Rudy Gobert was the X factor of that defense, right? I don't know if I've ever been more incorrect about my perception of what the game was going to be going into it, ever. Like, this shit is crazy. Right out of the gate, I thought Denver actually had some positives going for them. Jokic bullied Kyle Anderson, who was starting in place of Gordon, as well as Karl Anthony Towns for a bucket at the rim, which showed to me at least that I thought that he was just not going to get stopped like he was in Game 1. I was like, there it is. You can't stop him. It's officially happening. The Denver Nuggets are back. This is just too easy, right? Dude scored 16 points in this game. 16. He had 32 the other time at least. Jesus. Even Aaron Gordon, who was completely shut out in Game 1, looked very good early, scoring 13 points in Quarter 1, including hopping into a three-pointer in the corner. Cat started off 5 for 4 from the field with 11 points. Denver would shoot just 42% for this quarter. However, that was the best that they would do in any quarter in this game. Yeah, it's bad. What happened in Quarter 2, I can only describe as probably the greatest defensive quarter, at least in modern NBA basketball, that I have ever bared witness to. They held Denver to just 6 of 24 shooting, and they forced 5 turnovers, including a shot clock violation. Jamal Murray was in a fucking straight jacket in this one. Don't get me wrong, basically everyone for Denver had a bad time, but Jamal got it particularly bad. Everybody locked up in this quarter, but I was especially impressed by REID, who in my Game 1 commentary I described as a pretty alright defender. What a quarter he had. He would have 4 blocks and a steal in this quarter, blocking Jamal Murray at the rim and blocking Jokic twice and making him miss the 3rd shot. Genuinely, since he has reached MVP form, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone embarrass Jokic like this. It was especially awful trying to see them score without Jokic. They went 0 for 5 with 2 turnovers, including a shot clock violation in the first 3 minutes before Jokic checked in. But even though he's the best player in the NBA, Jokic really could not save them at this point. Denver had completely lost their composure, and they didn't regain it in the second half. Jamal hit a baseline fade, and I thought maybe they would, but from there, they would shoot below 40% from the field. It was more of that same space-absorbing defense. No one for Denver had anywhere to go. Everywhere they turned, there was defense. At this point, whenever there's a huge blowout, I usually stop taking notes. I didn't expect to stop taking notes in this one, but I did. Ant would hit this absolutely sexy fade over 2 defenders, though in general, Minnesota's offense was slowing down in this quarter, which allowed Denver to make it closer than it should have been. In fact, early into the 4th quarter, they managed to get it to a 17-point deficit. Obviously isn't good, but given the fact that they were down by 30 plus, they were slowly crawling back. However, 17 points is just too many to ask Denver to score from that point in the game because of this defense. Even 17 is asking for too much. So Minnesota convincingly wins Game 2, dominating on the defensive end like I've never seen before without their Defensive Player of the Year. All right, my key takeaways for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I can't believe this game. I was watching it with my jaw on the floor the entire time. I actually had it spoiled for me. It was my fault because I clicked on the NBA app not thinking about it when I was like 25-30 minutes behind. I had paused it because I had some other stuff to attend to. I was like, what do you mean they're down 30? How? How? I was so sure it was guaranteed to be a tie series, pretty much regardless of Rudy Gobert not being in this one. Like, obviously you saw my commentary for game 1 and I was like, I doubt they lose game 2. They're probably gonna come out strong in this one, but they got fucking embarrassed. This one, they didn't even have what you would think would be a strong matchup. They had Kyle Anderson guarding Jokic on the initial post-up, and sometimes it was Cat, and like, that's just not as good as what they were doing before, you know? I've talked about how that strategy with Rui Hachimura and the Lakers last year didn't really work, or this year as well, because the forward just probably wasn't quite enough to stop Jokic in any capacity, but like Cat and Naz Reid would be. But no, it turns out Kyle Anderson's a brick house because he was hard to move too. The defense got so crazy in this one that Nickeil Alexander-Walker was literally laughing in Jamal Murray's fucking face as he was playing defense against him like some psychotic shit. God, it was good. The thing I feel weird about is the Denver Nuggets are one of my favorite teams. I like this team a lot. I feel a lot of fondness to them because I thought they would be good, and they were. This was a fun game to watch just because defense this good is so rare. Their team has become one of my favorites in the playoffs thus far. It's slowly moving up the ranks, which is actually extremely impressive because I love the Knicks and the Mavericks this year. Both of those teams, love them so much. I'm starting to love Minnesota just as much. Their defense is just incomprehensibly good, and Ant is quickly moving up my favorite NBA players list, just like the Timberwolves are moving up on my favorite teams. Where does this team rank as an all-time defense? You know, obviously we have to see what they do for the rest of the postseason, the rest of this series. This might be better than any defense I've seen in the last 20 years. Now, mind you, in the previous eras of the NBA, defense was more prominent. However, I think that was just a factor of spacing. It's easier to play great defense when everyone's on top of each other, when everyone is spaced out, like way out of 4 players outside of the three-point line, when oftentimes it would be 1 or 2 in the 90s and 2000s. This defense in that context, considering how good modern NBA offenses are, considering how good Denver's offense is, because going into this series we were like, yeah, Minnesota, great defense, but this is an unstoppable Denver offense. You can't stop them. You can slow them down, and you can pray that you have enough offense that you can match them when you have slowed them down, but the odds are very low that you're just going to shut them out. No one's done that. No one's ever shut down Nikola Jokic. No one's ever shut down this Nuggets team healthy in the postseason. I do know that Jamal Murray is dealing with something. Regardless, I don't know if injuries is the reason why he got destroyed in this one, because I think it would have gone that way either way. Like, he wasn't moving poorly. He wasn't able to get around the defense at all. Offensively speaking in this one, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards were both excellent. They were extremely efficient, shooting around 65% from the field for the both of them. Doesn't get much better than that. They didn't have like crazy high volume scoring games, but they didn't need to. In general, on offense, this team was fine. Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid would both hit 4 3-pointers as well. But overall, everyone else kind of had a bad game, like shot poorly. Doesn't matter though if you're going to hold your team to 80 points. I'm beginning to think that Minnesota not only is going to win this series, they might win the whole thing. As I talked about in that game 1, I had them as a tier 2 contender. This is a tier 1 contender. This might be the best team in the NBA. I'm not kidding. I understand that a lot of it is that they have a great matchup against this team. But even in game 2, they lost that great matchup, and then they dominated even harder. Their defense was this good without the fucking defensive player of the year playing. Do you know how absurd that is? Do you know how ridiculous that is? And then on the offensive end, they've been a better team in the postseason than they were in the regular season. I thought there was a chance that this offense would be better in the playoffs. I didn't think it'd be this much better. It's still not great. Like, don't get me wrong, they're not like one of the most dominant offenses of the playoffs. They did average the most points per game in round 1, but that's because the Phoenix Suns defense fucking sucked. They haven't gotten off like that to the same degree in this series on offense, but it does not matter because of this defense. And that defense, straight up, dude, it's so fucking good. It's so good. I can't comprehend how good it is. It's like Andre Karolinko, Ben Wallace, Joe Dumars, and fucking Gary Payton are all on the same team. I think I said that in my game 1 reaction, but I especially mean it now. Holy shit. I keep saying that. I keep saying, holy shit. I don't know how else to react to this game, because I couldn't have expected this to go more differently than it did. If they can beat Denver, they can beat anyone. And if they do, if this team wins a championship, what a story that is. What a story that is. That is 2011 Mavericks shit. By the way, the 2011 Mavericks swept the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers in the second round of the playoffs, so it would be fitting for that comparison if they did actually close out the series in 4. I'll talk about if Denver has any shot from this point in their section, but yeah, this is an all-time great defense, and it might just end up being a championship team. Also, Anthony Edwards, 2006 Dwayne Wade type shit. Like, obviously not as good as Wade was in that finals to this point, and I'm talking about 6 playoff games thus far. But if he keeps this up, if he does this the whole way through, in terms of like, whoa, we weren't ready for you to be this good yet, we didn't know you could be this good yet, and then he proves that, very similar to Dwayne Wade in that way, in that 2006 run, where it's like, oh, this guy isn't just gonna be a superstar soon, he is right fucking now, and he might be even better of a superstar than I thought he could be. I wasn't sure Anthony Edwards would ever be as good as he is right now, because coming into the league, his processing, his decision making, little lackluster. It was a little lackluster. Now don't get me wrong, wasn't disastrous, but playmaking, passing, having good vision, not having tunnel vision, not being a black hole, all of those things are harder to teach than most skills in basketball. Those are things that are much more intuitive. They come to you naturally. A feel for the game, it's hard to teach. Anthony Edwards learned feel for the game and then some. He makes great decisions. He knows how to get to his spots every time. He's just so good. He's just too fucking good. And it's so fun to watch because he does play like Michael Jordan. The comparisons are there for a reason. He plays like Mike. There are so many shots that he hits where it just looks like I'm watching Michael Jordan live, and what a thrilling experience that is, because I didn't get a lot of Kobe live. I was obsessed with Kobe as a kid, but I didn't watch the games that much. At that point in my life, I was only really watching Bulls games, and by the time that I was like, oh, I should probably watch Kobe live more often, he tore his Achilles. This is the closest thing I'm getting to that kind of experience, I think. That or like Kawhi Leonard in 2019. I'm blown away. Okay, my key notes for the Denver Nuggets. Jamal Murray was in prison. He was in prison in this one. A fucking straitjacket staring at a wall the entire game. He threw that heat pack onto the floor. I feel the need to mention that because every time I don't mention something like that, everyone accuses me of like running PR for these guys. Yeah, shouldn't do that. It's also weird. It was just weird more than anything else to me. But I understand why he was so frustrated. If you've ever played basketball against someone who's just rocking your shit with their defense, like locking you up, it's an extremely frustrating experience. It is very hard to deal with mentally, and I'm not surprised that he went overboard as a result of that. It got to a point where I felt bad. Like, I started to feel bad for this team because of the defense. I shouldn't be feeling bad for a defending championship team in a postseason. Like, that type of situation doesn't happen, especially with a team that last year was so dominant. Aaron Gordon's lack of shooting, it's not a weakness. It's their Achilles heel. It is the biggest problem for this team, bar none. And the Timberwolves are hitting the fuck out of that heel. Like, they are abusing that issue to a degree that has just completely shut down one of the greatest offenses I've ever seen. Jokic's passing lanes just keep getting hounded. Like, as much as his scoring efficiency being down has mattered, and the fact that he had 16 points in game 2 has mattered, it's also just the fact that the dynamic of his game is disrupted dramatically, because you're still bringing 2 to the ball, but you're not paying the consequences for it anymore. You now get to double team Nikola Jokic one-on-one, and I guess it's not one-on-one once it's a double team, but you know, when he's trying to score on you and has the ball, you get to double him. Being able to do that without consequence, no other NBA team's been able to do that. Not even close. They did run more pick and roll in this one, which is what I said after the game one, was like, you guys just got to get the defense to move a little bit more. These like stale post-ups aren't going to get it done. But the pick and roll got locked the fuck up too. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought that they did a great job defending the pick and roll in game one. They just did slightly worse, and I think Denver did slightly better when they did that instead of posting Jokic up. And there was nothing to be done. Obviously, there's criticisms you can throw towards Denver for this one, but I don't even feel like this is their fault that much. Maybe I'm just being nice, but I was more impressed with Minnesota's defense than I was like, what's wrong with, you know, the Nuggets, because I didn't know what they could do. Like, after game one, I had suggestions. I was like, you can try to time the lobs with Aaron Gordon better. You can run pick and roll more. Like, there are options. You can try and shoot more threes because you're having more trouble getting to the paint. Like, have Michael Porter Jr. get up 10 attempts, Jamal Murray pull up from three a little bit more. A lot of those things I suggested actually happened. It didn't matter, though. It didn't matter, and they were worse after making those adjustments. There's only one silver lining for this entire game for Denver, which is that Justin Holiday went 4 for 5 from three. Literally the only guy for this team that wasn't a massive negative. I said in my game one reaction that he was one of the worst rotation players in the playoffs. That makes 2 role players who have taken my words personally, even though this one didn't release before that game. But Bobby Portis had like 30 points after I said that he was kind of overrated and they should trade him. Funny. Can Denver get back into this one, or is it over? I could see them winning 2 in Minnesota. Like, if they just bounced real hard back, like, maybe they can. I think they'll win game 3. I don't think this will quite be a sweep. I'd be surprised if it was a sweep. Let me say, in general, if they lose this series, I am going to come to the conclusion that unless there's just some team, it's going to take a while, I would say, a team that's just so clearly better than everybody, it might be impossible to two-peat. It might be impossible to go back-to-back in the modern NBA now. It has been a different champion every single year. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and if the Denver Nuggets do not win it this year, it will be now 2024, 5 years in a row where it was a different team. Or is it 6? I don't know, I'm bad at math. Obviously, not having home court advantage does not bode well. This is a team that lost 1 game in the postseason at home. I don't know, they have to steal. There's been series where like the away team won both of the first
2 games.
That's happened before, but it's pretty rare. So honestly, your best case scenario is probably heading into game 5 down 3-1, which isn't a very good scenario. I already know that the narratives are going to be wild. I wasn't on Twitter last night. My laptop was upstairs. I didn't feel like grabbing it, and I took it off of my phone for the sake of my mental health, and it has been a wise decision. So I didn't see the discourse, but I can already tell you what it was. I saw the narrative lining immediately. I imagine everyone is saying not everyone, but the last year's playoff run is invalidated by this. Like, they didn't have very strong competition that year. A bunch of teams this offseason juiced up. I don't mean that as an accusation, I just mean they got better. And then suddenly they fumble. I'm feeling more like this is Minnesota being great than Denver being bad, but it is very shocking that Denver is struggling to this degree, because I just didn't think anyone could do this. Like, I said to my dad the other day, you can't stop Nikola Jokic, and you really can't stop Denver's offense because you can't double him. He will make the right pass, and they will hit the shot. But that's not true in this series. They have broken the most unstoppable thing in modern NBA offense, and I think offense in the history of the NBA. I was saying star players, especially superstar players, don't really get shut down anymore. It doesn't happen. Like, guys who just suck the entire game when they're a superstar, it doesn't happen. Jokic was terrible in this game. He wasn't great in game 1 either. He was better, but he was still not great. It was probably the worst playoff game he had in a very long time, and then he made it much worse in game 2. Also, the MVP is being announced tomorrow. If it's Jokic, yikes. It's not going to be received well in this context. The timing could not be more off. In a way, it reminds me of the Mavericks in 07. Again, another Mavericks comparison for some reason, but Dirk won MVP in 2007 and then lost to the We Believe Warriors in round 1 as like, I think a 64-win team losing to the 8th seed. This isn't to that extreme because of course Minnesota had much higher expectations than that Warriors team, as much as people did like that Warriors team, but it is comparable and the MVP will be talked about. And I was expecting going into this next year, going into the 2025 season, Jokic would have 2 titles, 2 finals MVPs, and 3 MVPs. Holy shit, what a resume over a stretch of 4 seasons. If he goes into it with 3 MVPs and loses embarrassingly in round 2 the moment that they had more difficult competition, there's gonna be a lot of conversations. And I do think there's going to be a lot of unfairness because believe me, there were a lot of people licking their chops at this one who have been waiting to have a good excuse to dog on Jokic. They do have a good excuse. If you are a Jokic hater, if you are a Nuggets hater, you are eating good right now. You have all the fuel you could ever ask for, maybe the most you'll ever have. Yeah, I can't believe this shit. I am stunned. I really am. I didn't put out a preview for this series. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I didn't. I picked Denver in 7. I thought that this would go far. I thought Minnesota specifically matched up really well with them as they showed last year, but I thought ultimately the championship DNA would prevail. I'm probably wrong about that. It would be really surprising to me if Minnesota blew this series. They're just so rock solid. They're so well coached. They're so good defensively. The offense is good enough. There's just no chance. There's not no chance. This is such a good team. The Denver Nuggets are such a good team, but man, couldn't be much worse of a first 2 games than this. If you're a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, you should be fucking ecstatic right now. You guys might be for real champions. Like, you guys might actually be able to win a championship this year. I didn't think I'd be saying that about the Minnesota Timberwolves probably ever. I thought that the Rudy Gobert thing, like people saying it's the worst trade ever, were being a little dramatic. I didn't think it was that bad, but I certainly wasn't exactly like, you know, a fan. I was not like praising this team constantly. I was saying let's not dismiss them going forward, but there's a difference between that and thinking that they can win a title. I didn't even think of the Timberwolves that much going into this postseason. I didn't think they would be one of the most prominent teams here, but here we are now, and they might end up being the best team of the bunch. This playoffs has been awesome. I haven't even talked about like the offense and defensive mix that we are seeing right now. It's so, like, the defense is great and the offense is great, which means that there are plays where the offense prevails, but the defense is good enough that offense isn't easy. So when the offense prevails, it feels more rewarding without it going all the way to the extreme of like the 90s and 2000s and every team is scoring 90 points tops. You know, that's to me, that extreme goes too far in the opposite direction, where it's like, I want to see shots go in a little bit more often than that. But I didn't want to see them go in as often as they were to start the season. The NBA dialed back the officiating, and then that went into this postseason. This was the second least amount of free throws ever attempted in an NBA season, which is funny because people still complain about the fouling thing in the NBA, like it hasn't dramatically improved. There has been some discourse about like the Timberwolves getting away with fouls. The Indiana Knicks game in game 1 was really weirdly officiated. I know people are arguing that that game was rigged. I don't know about that, but it definitely was weird officiating. And in this game, there were definitely plays where Minnesota got away with a foul. Jamal Murray was complaining about it a lot. I remember there being a drive to the basket, or I was like, yeah, that's a foul. You got to call that. It wasn't the difference maker. Even if Denver shot 15 more free throws, they still would have lost this game. Yeah, I'm so excited. This postseason's been so good. I'm having so much fun. I hope you are too. Go check this out on Spotify if you haven't, if that's what you're into. But that is it. Thank you for watching, and shout out to Rudy for editing this video.